I grew up in a colonial-style house on the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where perfection lived. The red brick walls gleamed after every rainfall, the white shutters opened in neat symmetry, and the flower beds along the driveway bloomed with hydrangeas in the spring and tulips in early summer. Neighbors would comment on how lucky I was, how charming the house looked, how picturesque our life must have been. But inside those polished walls was a reality much harder to describe. One filled with silences that cut sharper than words, looks that diminished me before I even realized what was happening, and a sense of being tolerated rather than loved. The house was big enough that we never had to be too close, which, in hindsight, suited my family well. My mother, Evelyn, thrived on order and appearances. Her days revolved around keeping up a certain image, whether that was through perfectly ironed curtains, spotless glassware, or the way she dressed when she went into town, always in heels and pearls, even if she was just buying groceries. My father, Charles, was a man of work and silence. He ran an accounting firm downtown, leaving every morning at 7 sharp and returning around 6. He rarely asked about my day. His questions were more about performance than presence. How'd you do on your exam? Did you practice piano? What did you score at tennis? Anything outside those metrics didn't seem to matter. Then there was my brother, Daniel, the golden child. 2 years older than me, he was everything they wanted. Handsome in the way teenage boys sometimes are, athletic without even trying, and naturally charming. Teachers adored him, coaches fought to recruit him, and my parents practically glowed when he walked into a room. He was the sun, and I was something small orbiting around him, existing in the spaces he left behind. The breaking point didn't come in a single moment, but in the 1,000 small ones that filled my childhood like grains of sand piling up until they buried me. It happened when I offered to help my mother prepare dinner, and she told me not to bother, then let Daniel take over and praised him for trying. It happened at the dinner table, when I would say something about my day at school, and the conversation would drift back to Daniel's baseball game or my father's meetings as if I hadn't spoken at all. It happened in the living room when laughter erupted at something I said. Not because it was funny, but because they thought I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. I learned to press myself against the walls, to blend into corners, to become small enough that my presence wouldn't feel like an inconvenience. My bedroom became my refuge, a pale blue space at the end of the hallway where I could curl up with books and lose myself in stories that weren't mine. The characters on those pages didn't dismiss me. They didn't sigh when I cried or roll, their eyes when I tried to explain how I felt. They fought battles, they triumphed, they mattered. In their world, I found a place that didn't exist for me in my own. Still, I tried. I tried harder than I should have to prove myself, to earn even a fraction of the pride my parents reserved for Daniel. I studied late into the night, making sure my grades were perfect. I joined the debate team, thinking maybe if I won enough tournaments, they'd finally notice me. I practiced piano until my fingers ached, hoping the sound of a flawless recital might soften my mother's expression. And yet, no matter how much effort I poured in, it was never enough. At best, I was met with silence. At worst, with that dreaded sigh, "You're being too much again." One evening, when I was about 16, I remember walking down the hallway after finishing homework. The lights from the study spilled faintly into the corridor, and I heard the low murmur of voices. I paused, half out of curiosity, half out of habit. My mother's voice carried first, sharp and edged with frustration. "She's a burden, always has been." My heart seemed to stop, then pound so loudly I was sure they would hear it. My father's reply came next, quiet and dismissive. "She'll find her way eventually. Best not to coddle her." I froze. For years I had wondered if the problem was me, if I was imagining the constant dismissals, if maybe I was too sensitive, just like they said. But in that moment, the truth unfolded with devastating clarity. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't loved the way a daughter should be. I was tolerated, a weight to carry until they could set me down. I crept back into my room and shut the door silently. The blue walls that had once been my comfort suddenly felt like a cage, reminding me of every time I'd sat in there listening to their laughter in the kitchen downstairs, every time I'd wondered why it felt like I was standing on the outside, looking in. I pressed my face into my pillow and cried until my throat hurt. But beneath the tears was a new feeling I hadn't allowed myself before. Anger. I began to notice everything after that. The way Daniel could miss curfew and be met with a chuckle, while if I were 10 minutes late, my mother would lecture me about irresponsibility. The way my father asked Daniel about his college plans, but barely glanced at me when I mentioned mine. The way my mother introduced me to her friends was not with pride, but with phrases like, "She's still figuring things out," as if I hadn't already been proving myself for years. That summer, Daniel was accepted into Harvard, and the house was filled with congratulations, champagne, and pride. My parents hosted a dinner party, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate. I sat at the table, smiling politely, listening to speeches about his bright future, while my acceptance into Boston University went unnoticed. I had worked just as hard, earned scholarships, juggled jobs, and schoolwork to make it happen. But my accomplishment was a footnote, drowned in Daniel's spotlight. I think that was when I stopped trying to earn their approval. Not all at once, but slowly. I still did what I had to, still studied, still worked, still survived, but inside I began to build a wall. I realized that no matter how much I gave, they would never see me as enough. I wasn't their pride, I wasn't their joy. I was the burden, the one they endured. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what might have happened if I had spoken up, if I had walked into that study and confronted them that night. But at 16, I didn't have the words, and even if I had, I doubt they would have listened. Silence was easier for them, and silence became my survival. What I didn't realize then was that this quiet dismissal, this erosion of self-worth, was shaping me into someone who would one day push back harder than they ever expected. Someone who would refuse to remain invisible. Someone who would eventually walk away. But in that chapter of my life, in that house of quiet cuts, I was still learning to carry the weight of their indifference, still figuring out what it meant to live as the outsider in my own family story. By the time I was 28, my life looked very different from those years I had spent feeling small in my parents' house. I had clawed my way out of that quiet suffocation, put myself through Boston University, and eventually moved to New York City. I worked harder than I ever imagined I could, taking on internships, freelance projects, and late-night shifts just to keep the lights on. Over time, the work paid off. I built a small marketing firm from scratch, 2 employees at first, then 5, then 10. We worked out of a cramped office in Manhattan with mismatched furniture, but our clients were real, and the checks cleared. For the first time, I felt like I was more than enough. Every deal signed, every campaign launched, was a piece of proof that I could stand on my own. When I looked at my bank account and saw the balance climb into 6 figures, I thought maybe I had finally done it. Maybe now, even my family would see me as someone worth noticing. So when my mother's 60th birthday came around, I wanted to give her something unforgettable. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that wanted her approval. Still a part of me that thought if I just gave enough, she would finally give back. I told her I would handle the celebration from beginning to end. I rented out a grand ballroom in a hotel in downtown Boston. The contract alone cost $25,000, money I paid without hesitation. I wanted chandeliers that glistened like crystals suspended in the air, tables lined with white roses, and champagne that never stopped flowing. I hired a jazz band because my mother always claimed she loved the sophistication of old standards. I even ordered a 3-tier cake with gold leaf detailing because I wanted everything to look like it had been touched by elegance. For weeks, I poured myself into every detail. I worked with the event planner late at night after my firm's deadlines, choosing linens, deciding on menus, and imagining my mother's face when she walked in and saw how much effort I had put into celebrating her. I thought of her smile, the one I used to chase when I was a child, and I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this time it would appear without hesitation. But then, the shifts began. At first, they were subtle. My mother would casually mention that she had added a few more names to the guest list. I didn't think much of it. What was 10 more people? Then it became 20, then 30. Soon, the intimate gathering I had envisioned turned into a small army of her friends, neighbors, and acquaintances I had never met. My brother Daniel inserted himself next. He and his wife, Claire, started calling the caterer directly, bypassing me entirely. I only found out when the caterer emailed me a revised menu I hadn't approved. Claire wanted filet mignon instead. Of chicken, Daniel insisted on a whiskey bar, and suddenly the budget was swelling far beyond what I had planned. When I tried to bring it up, Daniel laughed. "Relax," he said. "It'll be better this way. You don't know how to throw a party like this. Leave it to us." My father wasn't far behind. He phoned the event planner one afternoon to clarify certain details, then instructed her to move the band set closer to cocktail hour and to add a slideshow of family photos. I hadn't approved any of it. When I confronted him, his answer was dismissive. "It's just small things. Don't make it into a big deal." With every passing day, I watched the event I had built, the one I had poured my money and heart into, slip further and further from my hands. The control I thought I had was nothing more than an illusion. The final blow came late one night when I visited the house for dinner. My mother and father had gone to bed, and I was helping myself to some water in the kitchen. As I passed the hallway, I heard voices, Daniel and Claire talking in the den. "She's not part of this," Daniel said, his voice tinged with amusement. "She just wrote the check." Claire laughed softly, a cruel sound that sliced straight through me. "Exactly. She'll never be one of us, not really. She tries too hard. It's sad, honestly." I stood frozen, the glass shaking in my hand. My stomach knotted, and my chest ached with the familiar weight of being unseen. For a moment, I considered bursting into the room, demanding they admit what they had said. But I knew what would happen. They would call me dramatic, twist it until I was the problem, the sensitive one, the unstable one. I set the glass down quietly, my hands trembling, and left the house without saying goodbye. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I told myself the party was for my mother, not for me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been erased from my creation. Everywhere I turned, I was excluded. Meetings about the event took place without me. Decisions were made, and I only heard about them afterward. My mother spoke of her party as though I had been nothing more than a sponsor. No one mentioned the countless hours I had spent planning, or the money I had sacrificed to make it happen. I wasn't the organizer, the daughter who had tried to give her mother something special. I was invisible, just as I had been in that red brick house years ago. The more it unfolded, the more a quiet rage began to stir inside me. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface. For years, I had allowed myself to be pushed aside, diminished, made small. And here I was again, repeating the same story, playing the same role, in front of the same people who had always taught me I wasn't enough. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear Daniel's voice. "She just wrote the check." Those words burned into me, branding me with the role they had chosen for me since childhood, the outsider, the burden, the one who never quite belonged. But something was shifting inside me, something they didn't see coming. The girl who had pressed herself against walls in that colonial house, who had silenced her anger and swallowed her pain, was beginning to awaken. I didn't yet know what I would do, but I knew one thing with certainty. I would not let them take everything from me again. Not this time. A week before the party, I drove back to my parents' house in Boston, a place that still carried the weight of every dismissal, every silence, every sigh that had once told me I wasn't enough. I had convinced myself that this visit would be simple: drop off some invoices for the caterer, finalize a few last-minute details, and reassure myself that all the chaos I had been feeling was worth it. Maybe, I thought, if I stood in that house with everything ready to unfold, I would feel a flicker of pride, some sense that all of this effort and money had been for something. But when I climbed the familiar staircase and turned into the room that had been mine since childhood, I stopped cold. My room, my sanctuary of pale blue walls, my shelves once lined with books I had collected through years of hiding away, was gone. The posters I had hung as a teenager, the desk where I had studied long nights for exams, even the quilt I had carried with me through college breaks, all of it had vanished. In its place was a guest room, stripped of personality, dressed in a beige bedspread, and bland hotel-style lamps. The walls, once filled with pieces of me, stood blank and silent. I gripped the doorframe, staring at the erasure of myself, as though I had never belonged there at all. It was as if they had taken a sponge to my existence and scrubbed me clean from the house. The only trace that remained of me was the indentation on the floor where my bookshelf used to stand. I didn't say anything to my mother about it when she came upstairs and found me standing there. She simply shrugged. We needed more space. For guests, she said, as though it were the most practical, obvious thing in the world. Her voice carried no hesitation, no recognition of what this might mean to me. I nodded silently, but inside, something snapped. It was not a loud shattering, but a quiet, seismic crack, the kind that shifts the ground beneath your feet. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much money I spent, no matter how grand a party I planned, they would always find a way to erase me. They had been erasing me all my life, my voice, my accomplishments, my worth, and now they had erased even the physical evidence of my childhood. My room, my last refuge, had been transformed into something sterile, impersonal, disposable, just like the role they always assigned me. That night, back in my apartment in New York, I opened my laptop. My hands shook, but the decision was already made in my heart. One by one, I canceled everything: the ballroom booking, the caterers, the jazz band, the cake with gold leaf detailing. Every piece of it vanished with a few clicks. The system processed my requests with mechanical indifference, flashing back receipts of partial refunds and deductions for non-refundable deposits. By the time I finished, I was out nearly $10,000. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. My chest heaved as if I had just run miles, but the air felt cleaner, easier to breathe. I hadn't expected it, but it felt liberating to tear it all down. The party had never really been mine. It had become theirs, twisted and reshaped until I was little more than a wallet attached to a name they disregarded. Canceling it wasn't just about the money or the logistics. It was about reclaiming something they had stolen long before: my agency, my right to decide how much of myself I was willing to give. The morning the news spread, my phone lit up like a firestorm. My mother was the first to call. Her voice, shrill with disbelief, rang through the receiver. "How could you do this to me? Do you have any idea what people will think? You are selfish, unbelievably selfish." I didn't answer right away. For once, I let the silence hang on my side of the line, a silence that wasn't shameful or apologetic, but deliberate. When I finally spoke, my words were steady. "I did what I needed to do." She gasped, as though I had cursed her. "You've ruined everything," she snapped before hanging up. Minutes later, my father's number appeared. His tone was colder, less emotional, but no less cutting. "You've embarrassed us. You're too emotional, always making a scene. Couldn't you have just gone along with it for once? This was for your mother." I almost laughed, bitter and sharp. For my mother. Always for my mother, for Daniel. For anyone but me. "I've gone along with it my entire life," I said quietly. "Not anymore." Then came Daniel's call. His anger was almost theatrical, his voice booming through the line. "Do you know what you've done? People are calling me, asking what happened. You've humiliated us. Do you ever stop thinking about yourself? This was a family event, and you've made it all about you." Something in me hardened at his words. For years, I had let him define the narrative, let him convince everyone, including me, that I was the problem, the difficult one, the outsider. But not this time. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "It was never about me. That's the point." He sputtered, trying to regain control, but I ended the call before he could. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. Strength. The rush of finally refusing to play the part they had written for me. Not one of them asked why. Not one of them paused long enough to wonder what had led me here, what it had cost me emotionally, financially, spiritually to try and make them happy. To them, I was still the problem, still the burden. But for the first time, their outrage didn't make me shrink. It made me stand taller. For once, I wasn't on the outside, pressed against the walls, invisible in my own family. I was at the center of their fury. And though they thought their anger would crush me, it felt strangely liberating. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like ripples in water. Relatives called, demanding explanations. Some scolded me, some pleaded with me, and a few whispered their quiet admiration, though they would never admit it publicly. My mother refused to speak to me for weeks. My father sent short, clipped emails about family obligations. Daniel posted smiling photos of his dinners and gatherings online, making sure the world knew he was still the golden son. But I, finally, felt free. Each morning, I woke up lighter, as though the act of canceling that party had cut invisible strings I had carried for decades. For the first time, I had drawn a boundary, a line they could not cross. They might call me selfish, dramatic, or ungrateful, but I knew the truth. I hadn't destroyed the celebration. They had destroyed me, long ago. All I had done was refuse to keep funding my erasure. When I thought back to that beige guest room, the one that had replaced my childhood refuge, I realized it had been the final symbol I needed. They had made it clear. There was no space for me in that house, no place for me in their carefully constructed story. So I had made space for myself somewhere else, in the decision to walk away, in the choice to say no, in the courage to take it all back. And once I had taken it back, there was no returning to the girl who used to cry into her pillow, wondering why she was never enough. That girl was gone. What remained was a woman who had finally found her voice. After the chaos of the canceled party faded into whispers and recriminations, I was left with a strange, unsettling quiet. For weeks, my phone rang endlessly with relatives, demanding explanations, neighbors gossiping, and my parents alternating between icy silence and bursts of rage. Daniel filled social media with smiling family photos, pretending nothing had happened, painting me as the one who had imploded for no reason. But beneath their noise, I could feel something shifting deep inside me. The years of swallowing pain, of silencing myself, of bending to fit into their story, were finally over. I realized something important in that silence. I could leave. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just walk away. But when you've spent your whole life pressed against the walls of a house that taught you your worth was conditional, leaving feels like tearing out roots buried deep in concrete. I had to wrestle with guilt, with the voice in my head that still whispered, "You're abandoning them. You'll regret this. You're proving them right." But there was another voice now, louder, stronger, one that said, "You deserve more than scraps." So, I made the hardest choice of my life. I walked away. I sold my Manhattan apartment, a sleek one-bedroom that had once felt like proof I was independent. Successful, unstoppable, it sold for just over $780,000, a profit I could never have imagined when I first scraped together the down payment years before. With that money, I bought a townhouse in Portland, Maine for $450,000. It wasn't as glamorous as Manhattan, but it was mine. When I unlocked the door for the first time and stepped inside, the quiet enveloped me. But it wasn't the suffocating quiet of my parents' house. It was a quiet that belonged to me, a quiet that felt safe. The walls were blank at first, waiting for me to decide who I was without their judgment. Slowly, I filled them with pieces of my life that reflected who I had become, not who they told me I was. Photographs from trips I had taken, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, sipping espresso in a cafe in Rome, walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence. Art I had bought not because it was expensive or impressive, but because it made me feel something. Shelves of books I loved, stories that had once been my only refuge, now proudly displayed as a testament to the girl who had survived by finding worlds within pages. My firm continued to grow too. From 10 employees, we expanded to 20, then 30. I signed contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, building campaigns for clients who believed in me and valued my creativity. Each win, each paycheck, felt like another brick in the foundation of the life I was building, one they had no control over. And yet, Even in my new home, their voices echoed sometimes. My mother's dismissive sigh, my father's silence, Daniel's laughter, they haunted me in unexpected moments. When I landed a major contract and instinctively reached for the phone to tell someone, I realized there was no one in my family I wanted to call. They would not congratulate me. They would not beam with pride. They would find a way to belittle it, to remind me I was too much or not enough. That realization cut deep, but it also freed me. If they would never celebrate me, then I would learn to celebrate myself. So I started doing things for no one's approval but my own. I traveled through Europe, wandering art museums in Paris, drinking wine in vineyards in Bordeaux, walking along the canals of Amsterdam as though I had been born to chase horizons. I sat on the Spanish steps in Rome, watching strangers laugh and fall in love, and realized how small my family's world had been compared to the vastness of life waiting outside it. I took risks, too. I invested in new ventures, poured money into expanding my firm into London, even when people warned me it was risky. It worked. Within a year, my firm's revenue doubled. I bought myself small luxuries, things my mother would have mocked as frivolous, like a cashmere coat in Florence or a designer handbag in Paris, not because I needed them, but because they were mine, earned by my effort. Of course, my family still tried to pull me back. My mother would call, her tone sharp, laced with accusation. "You've become selfish, dramatic. You think you're better than us." My father would send cold, clipped emails about family obligations, as though I were still a child who had to obey. Daniel, ever the golden son, threw barbs through social media posts, snide comments at family gatherings I no longer attended. They tried to rewrite the story, to make me small in their retellings, to paint me as the one who had destroyed everything. But here's the truth I had finally come to understand. I didn't need their version of the story anymore. For years, I had begged for a seat at their table only to be pushed to the margins. Now, I was building my table in my own house, surrounded by people who saw me as I was, not as they wanted me to be. Friends who celebrated my wins without resentment. Colleagues who respected my work. Clients who valued my voice. Slowly, the narrative shifted, not in their eyes, but in mine. Looking back, I see it now. Freedom doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes freedom comes from finally letting it go. My family's love, or lack of it, had once defined me, shaped me, confined me. But the day I canceled that party, the day I sold my apartment, the day I chose to walk away, I stopped living for their approval. In letting go of them, I found myself. Now, when I stand in my townhouse in Portland looking out the window as the ocean wind sweeps in, I don't feel like the burden, the outsider, the girl pressed against the walls of a red brick house that never truly held her. I feel like a woman who fought for her own space, her voice, her own life. And though my family may still call me dramatic, selfish, too much, I finally know the truth. I was never too much. I was simply never enough for them. And that is no longer my burden to carry.